Do you have a sense of how your usage is going to change compared to last year or the first 2 years?
Pretty much where Cooper Kupp was at. That's pretty much where I'm at. But I mean, my ability to move in different positions is going to be more. I'm able to go in outside. You don't really see Cooper Kupp lining outside as many times as I would, me lining in the backfield, or me just lining up in different positions to get the ball. I mean, just seeing what Cooper Kupp did last year, I mean, that gives me so much hope, give me so much excitement to see what I can be able to do in the same position that he was. And I feel like we're going to have a whole different team, honestly.
Well, Vikings fans, you should have hope, and you should be excited, because not only is the Vikings passing game going to run more through Justin Jefferson than it ever has before, but ironically, the Vikings run game is also going to run more through JJ than it ever has before. If you're new here, I'm Brett Coleman. I break down NFL film for a living. I draw on whiteboards. I make fancy graphics, or rather, my editor makes fancy graphics, and I drink while doing all of that, because quite frankly, I can't watch the Vikings play football without drinking. It hurts. Today, we're going to be going over exactly how Minnesota and new head coach Kevin O'Connell will be using Justin Jefferson, and what exactly the quote-unquote Cooper Kupp role even is, because it's a very specific role that few receivers in the league are even capable of doing, but Jefferson just so happens to be one of those few. I'm not going to waste any more of your time. Go grab yourself your favorite comfy chair, of course your favorite comfy drink, and let's get into this film. In order to understand why Cooper Kupp is so different from 95% of other receivers, and why the Vikings offense is about to undergo a drastic shift, you first need to understand how the Rams offense as a whole is different from almost every other team in the league. Last year under Sean McVay, the Rams led the league in 11 personnel looks, meaning 1 back, 1 tight end, and 3 receivers, and they used that grouping 86% of the time per Sharp Analytics. That is an insanely high percentage of use for one personnel grouping, let alone a personnel grouping that traditionally does not run the ball that effectively on early downs. However, looking at the Rams specifically, nearly 25% of their total plays for the season were runs out of 11 personnel. And they had the highest number of those runs out of that personnel grouping in the entire league at a whopping 319. The league average, by the way, was only about 214 carries per team out of 11 personnel, so the Rams were roughly 50% higher than the middle of the pack in terms of runs out of 3 wide receiver sets. But even with all of that being said, despite their sample size being way more than every other team in the league, the Rams still had a top 10 success rate and a top 10 rushing DVOA on early down runs out of 3 wide receiver sets. So not only did they do it more than everyone else, but they were also consistently good at it as well, even on so-called run-heavy downs. Now, of course, the reason for that success is the natural advantage and flexibility that the Rams have with Cooper Kupp on the field. They were never forced to get out of their best personnel grouping in the pass game just to be able to run the ball. And by that, I mean they could afford to stay in 11 personnel 86% of the time and throw it all over the yard, while still at least having the threat of balance with the run game because of Kupp's blocking ability. This is the exact same flexibility that Kevin O'Connell is likely going to try to get out of the Vikings offense this year, primarily because they also have a uniquely versatile receiver in Justin Jefferson. I'll give you an example of what I mean by all this, because to me it's easier to show than tell here. This is a 2nd and 8 play from the Jaguars and Rams game last season, and because the Rams are once again in 11 personnel, the Jags are naturally in a nickel look to combat that, and at least pre-snap, they're showing potentially some kind of too high safety coverage here, likely a quarters coverage look. Now, by the time the Rams are done motioning everyone around here, they're in this 2x2 look that is a slightly modified version of a formation that McVay calls solo left ace, or at least he called it that in one of his older playbooks, so I'm assuming he still calls it that now, and maybe O'Connell calls it the same thing, but who knows. Anyway, with the tight end set to the boundary and the Jags presenting a quarters look, Jacksonville will be setting their 3-technique defensive tackle to the quote-unquote strength of the offensive formation, i.e. the side that the tight end is on. And as a result of that, with that 3-technique to the boundary side B-gap to match strength with strength, there's naturally going to be what coaches call a bubble in the other B-gap on the weak side of the formation. And that's exactly what the Rams want from Jacksonville. In short, a bubble is an uncovered gap in a defensive front that most offenses will try to attack, since mathematically, there's usually going to have to be a weak point somewhere on the line. What's unique about the Rams, though, is that if you give them a bubble on the weak side of a 4-down front, just like the Jags are doing here, they're capable of attacking it in a variety of different ways that most other teams just can't do. And one of those ways is this call in particular, which is a wide zone run behind Cooper Kupp. Most offenses would not have the balls to do this because if you're going to run wide zone anywhere out of 11 personnel looks, it's usually going to be behind the tight end instead, not behind a slot receiver, so that you can work these double teams to the front side with as many of your bigger bodies as possible and try to get the running back one-on-one with a DB in space. But again, the Rams treat Cooper Kupp as practically another tight end from a game planning perspective. They can run outside zone to the weak side out of 11 personnel as if it's coming from a balanced 12 personnel look because of the kind of blocker he is. And here's the kicker and why running this play to the weak side is so advantageous if you can pull it off. As I said earlier, because all that motion created this bubble in the front and made this right guard completely uncovered, now he has the freedom to just jam the nose tackle and help the center reach block him, and then he can immediately get the fuck out of there and go up to the second level, totally unencumbered by anyone so that he can pick off the linebacker. If you're running wide zone to the strong side instead, you can't do that because the 3 technique is over there. There's a lot more traffic, a lot more bodies, so it's way harder to get cleanly up to those second level blocks. But when you're attacking that bubble in the front, you can release a guard like that, and it makes it way easier to take care of the linebackers. Meanwhile, again, you have Cooper Kupp also jamming the defensive end himself, so the right tackle can get a healthy edge on him, and then he gets up to the second level too, so that he can get on this safety and just ride him back as far as possible. Look at this technique here. His hips are square, his eyes are up, his feet are nice and wide and balanced. His hands are hooked under the pad so he can keep the defender within his frame at all times. I mean, this is tight end shit. Most receivers don't block like this, and this one play, I think, is a prime example of why Kevin O'Connell is so excited about putting Justin Jefferson in the Kupp role. Under O'Connell, the Rams from 11 personnel were able to use a lot of these styles of runs that typically require 12 personnel or even 21 personnel to execute well, but now the Vikings will also be able to exploit that advantage too because of how good a blocker Jefferson is. Minnesota's coaches aren't just excited because they can feed Jefferson easy receptions on crossing routes like the Rams do for Kupp. They're excited because the Cooper Kupp role is the key to the entire McVay and now O'Connell offensive philosophy, whether the player in that role is getting the ball or not. I am going to show you an example of Justin Jefferson also being an absolute dog in the run game, just to kind of drive this whole point home. But before I do, I want to thank my friends over at Felix Gray for being extremely patient with me with how long this episode took to make and helping to make it possible in the first place. They've always been a very supportive partner for the channel, and I am grateful for them as always. And as you might expect on shoots like tonight, where I'm recording for hours on end and dumping cards and uploading stuff to my editor, the blue light glasses that I use from Felix Gray are real lifesavers. They filter 15 times more blue light from all my various screens, so there's a lot less disruption to my sleep cycle, and when I finally do get to bed, they have a huge impact on my sleep quality. If you're interested in trying out blue light filtering glasses for your own evening routine to see if they can help improve your sleep quality, you can get them from Felix Gray in a wide variety of frames, both in prescription and non-prescription for those of you with special eyes. And you can get those glasses for 10% off the normal price with promo code FILMROOM10. Again, that is 10% off of any frames you want at the link in the description below, promo code FILMROOM10. Thank you to Felix Gray for having my back once again. I owe you guys as per usual. And with that being said, why don't we go watch Justin Jefferson kick the absolute shit out of some people. Even going back to the days of Justin Jefferson at LSU, he's always been a very willing and capable run blocker. Maybe not quite as strong as Kupp, obviously, but he certainly had all the effort and physicality you look for. However, under the previous Vikings coaching staff, they never really put that blocking ability to use by lining him up in the slot. Hell, they rarely ever used him as a slot, period, to be honest, because they only ran 3 wide receiver looks 47% of the time, which was the 5th lowest rate in the league, so it's no wonder why Jefferson spent 75% of his total snaps as an outside receiver. But because of those lack of snaps in the slot, Jefferson was not really afforded many opportunities to impact the run game like Kupp does for LA, or even like Jefferson himself did back when he was primarily a slot option at LSU. Interestingly enough, when looking at how the Tigers used Jefferson in the run game just 3 short years ago, you can see a lot of similarities between his former role there and the role that he is likely going to play under the new Viking staff this season. There was a play that Nate Tice from The Athletic posted recently that I think is a great example of this. It's from the 2019 game against Auburn, and the Tigers are in a bunch look calling a run that, at least in their playbook back then, they called snail. Snail is basically the same angle of attack and the same blocking responsibilities as an inside zone run, except they're calling it from same side alignment, meaning the running back is not crossing the quarterback's face to receive the handoff, they're just taking a quick sidestep, get the ball, and go straight downhill to read the blocks. It looks very much like a gap scheme run like Duo, but technically speaking, it is a zone blocking based run. Now, the reason why LSU could get away with running this play from this alignment in 11 personnel of all groupings is because of Justin Jefferson being the point man in this bunch. Auburn is in cover 3 here, they're maxed out in the run fit, meaning on paper they have at least one body for every single gap. There's pretty much no way that this thing is going to go anywhere between the tackles. But because of the way that the DBs have to leverage themselves in their alignment in cover 3 against a bunch look, there is actually room here for LSU to give themselves a slight advantage by using what's called a fold block with their wide receivers. A fold block is a common adjustment that offenses make in order to give their blockers at the point of attack better angles with which to engage their man and to set up a seam in the defense. In particular here, the nickel DB is lined up outside of Justin Jefferson by a yard or so because that's what he's taught to do in cover 3. He is the curl flat defender after all, so he needs to be lined up outside. And because of that, Jefferson has a great angle and leverage on that nickel DB in order to engage him and kick him even further outside. At the same time, the other receiver folds in behind Jefferson, again with a much easier angle of attack, in order to crack down on this safety that's going to be flying downhill into the gap. Both of these receivers are given way better chances to succeed by this fold block adjustment, and you can see that intended seam almost immediately develop as a result. Clyde Edwards-Helaire cuts straight into that space, and watch how Jefferson just keeps sustaining this block at the point of attack. He knows that Clyde is likely going to be aiming right for his hip, so he just keeps fighting and fighting and fighting, and LSU ends up getting about an 11-yard gain on this run just because of Jefferson's block creating that space. Just like I said before with Kupp, it is not normal to have a superstar receiver that also happens to block with this kind of effort and intention, but Jefferson absolutely is one of those abnormal superstars. When you watch that playback from his LSU days, and then you also watch how Kevin O'Connell used Kupp last year in similar looks with fold blocks all over the place, it's pretty easy to draw parallels between their skill sets. The list of players that on one play could be the alert post deep down the field and score a 50-yard touchdown, and then on the very next play be the kick-out blocker on split zone and completely blow up a safety to spring a run, that list is extremely short, and half of them are tight ends. But make no mistake about it, both Kupp and Jefferson are in that group. Do I think that Jefferson can do everything that Kupp does as a blocker? Not necessarily, because to me, Kupp is the best at it in the league, but Justin is still 90 to 95% of the way there, which is still more than enough for the Vikings to make this philosophical change. I know that we like to get distracted by all the great stuff that Kupp and Jefferson do when running routes and winning contested catches and being monsters in the red zone, being major threats after the catch. All of that stuff is amazing, but that's only 60% of why this role is so important. The other 40% is the stuff that people don't pay attention to because it doesn't show up in the box score. But believe me, that 40% is what ultimately will make this offense work. Cooper Kupp was born for this role, but so is Justin Jefferson. They are very different players, of course, and yet, to me, they're one and the same. Alright, I hope this helped to clear up any questions that you guys might have about what the Cooper Kupp role actually is and what it might mean for Justin Jefferson going forward in their own version of the Rams offense up in Minnesota. As always, if you guys have any questions or you need anything clarified, feel free to ask down in the comments below and I will answer whatever I can with the resources that I have available to me. I, of course, will be back here next week with another full film room episode because we are ramping up towards the season. Camp starts soon, game starts soon. This is going to be a rocket ship between now and the Super Bowl. So if you're not already subscribed, do that now. Click like, click the bell, all the stuff that YouTubers tell you to do. You guys are adults. I trust you to do it if you want to. But hope you enjoyed this. Come back next week. And yeah, I'll see you guys then. Cheers.